This is Profit Talks, a podcast produced by Hayek Global College and dedicated to exploring how you can ethically maximize profits. For more episodes, please visit hayekcollege.com/profit. Hello, my guest today is Dr. Drew Miller. Hi, Dr. Drew Miller. How are you?
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Pleasure to have you. So Dr. Drew Miller is Director of Advanced Analysis Applications, and he has served as a management consultant, due diligence analyst, and business wargaming professional for several decades. He has a PhD in operations research from Harvard University and has also taught in university business schools. Dr. Drew Miller, when I think about business wargaming, I haven't heard about business wargaming before talking to you and looking at your profile. And I was curious to know, like, when I worked in my company's family business, we went through the strategic planning, but never through a business wargaming. And I wondered what the difference is really between a conventional strategic planning and the business wargaming.
Sure. Well, it's not something you learn in a college program. I don't think business wargaming is taught anywhere. I actually learned it at ConAgra, a big food and agricultural company. I was on the corporate planning and development staff. And so for years, I worked on the strategic planning process. We did strategic plans every year, the traditional strategic plans. And if you read about what people write about strategic plans, most people say they don't work. The problem is it's just kind of, you take what you had in the past and you project it forward. You may have an idea or two, but it's something you just write down. Here's our plan. This is what we're going to do. It's usually exaggerated what you think you're going to accomplish, especially if you're presenting it to a corporate level area for approval. And it just doesn't generate much new ideas or excitement. And then once the plan is developed, and most of the time they're developed because people have to develop the plans, they develop this big, thick plan with a lot of details, a lot of numbers, then they stick it away and it's never used again. So business wargaming kind of rose as an alternative to that. And it's a lot better for a lot of reasons. If you show the video, that covers it a lot more. But basically, it's better because it's a lot more realistic and people really get into it. Strategic planning processes are normally pretty boring. People don't really like them. They're not very imaginative. And there's not much feedback or challenge that goes on. So when you set up a war game process where you got different teams in the war game and they're competing against each other and being judged, now you've turned this, planning, writing exercise into a competition, into a game. A war game is the term we use. And people really try to say, I'm going to try to come up with the best ideas and I'm going to try out new things because it's a safe environment. You're supposed to try out new ideas. And then you find out what works. And with the competing teams in there in a war game, and again, the videos make this a lot easier to understand. With the competing teams, someone will come up with an idea that sounds pretty good. Another team will copy it and improve it. And so during this process, and these war games can take several days depending on how long you want, you come up with just some really fantastic ideas that you would never get out of a traditional strategic planning process. So that's the major benefit of them. And they've been done in the past just by really big corporations. The major consulting firms have offered them, but the vast majority of companies don't know about wargaming, don't do it, even though it's something that even a mid-sized company can do. And it's just, if you read what CEOs say after they've been through a strategic plan, they will tell you that it was just unbelievably fantastic. They got great new actionable ideas that they can do. They figured out a threat that, had been there all the time, but they never realized it before until it played out in the war game. And it's just a night and day in terms of effectiveness and new ideas and value over the traditional strategic planning process.
So let me see if I understood. The business wargaming is an alternative way to do strategic planning, but with a simulation of different scenarios where you would create scenarios where people would actually compete with each other. So you would actually create games and people will compete to win a certain game, or?
Well, the game's probably not the best word. This is not electronic. So it's, for example, let's say I was at a food company. So let's say we've got food companies. My home team, ConAgra, we're going to have a team, and all of our major competitors are going to have teams in the war game. So
Hmm.
I'm going to, and the game is in periods of time periods. Like we're going to play next year. So for the next 2 hours, it's now 2022 if we're in 2021, and we're going to play. What are we going to do? And ConAgra says, hey, I'm going to launch a salmon aquaculture company with this freshly prepared great fish product. You take it out of the bag, and I think it's going to be hugely successful, and I'm going to launch that. There's a market team that's evaluating this, but the best thing is other people react to it. So for ConAgra, Tyson Foods might say, you know what, that's not a bad idea, and we think we can do it better. We're going to launch it, only we're going to make these two changes over ConAgra's plan. And then people judge it. Now, another team, a salmon seafood company sees this and says, well, you know what, ConAgra is stupid on these 2 points on their idea, and Tyson's bad on this other one. But we can do these things they're doing, and we'll throw in this thing, and this is how to really do it. So people compete, these teams compete. They're judged by a market team. There can also be a technology evaluation team if you've got more high tech products and industries you're dealing with. But this process goes on by time periods over time. And this has scenarios. You can do that, you don't have to. We could add a scenario like halfway through our 2022 scenario, we say, hey, guess what? There's a bad pandemic coming, people have to now react to it. Or there can be a global, if you're dependent on international shipping, and I'm worried as a CEO, I'm worried about what happens when there's a big Pacific Ocean shipping shutdown for 3 months, and we're getting a lot of stuff from there. I can say, hey, there's a dock workers strike, there's a pandemic in Asia that shuts down shipping, whatever it is. I can invent scenarios to force people in my company to consider issues that we really think are important, but we haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about it. But we're not just thinking of it as a strategic planning process where we're sitting in our office and someone writes up an idea and puts it in paper. We're competing, and that's the competition. So at the end of each round, here's where the competition comes in. This market team now evaluates all the different products, and they say, ConAgra's product really sucked. It failed in the market. The Tyson one did better, but this company's product really did well. And then people react to that. So people are now competing. So strategic planning is not this, hassle exercise I got to go through to produce numbers.
Hmm.
It's exciting. We're coming up with new ideas, and I'm competing with other people. And by the way, who's watching all this? The CEO, the top people of the company. So people are really getting into it because this is their chance, to show their stuff. How good am I at business development and developing new ideas, working with people, all those other things.
This is fantastic. And it's
Mhm.
also a way to make it fun, as I can see.
Yeah, much more fun, and it's very intense. The major disadvantage of all this is, whereas someone might spend half a day or, a couple hours over a period of weeks doing a written strategic plan, when you do a war game, you basically got your top management people tied up in strategic planning through this war game for a day or two. So it's not that expensive. I mean, you can hire a consultant like me for a couple $100,000 to do a war game. That's not the big cost. The big cost is your top people, your top management in the company are spending 2 to 3 days doing nothing but this wargaming exercise. So that's the big expense and the biggest difficulty companies have doing it. And that's why a lot of times you'll see it, it'll, maybe start on Friday and run into the weekend if you don't want to disrupt your normal operations that much.
And how are the teams set up? So you have the product team, and then you also have the market team who is doing the.
No, it's not that way. And again, the videos explain a lot better. So
Yeah.
let's switch to a different. So I'm in the airline industry. I'm United Airlines is my company. Well, I'm going to have a United Airlines team. I'm going to have Southwest. I'm going to have Delta. I'm going to have maybe Qantas Airlines from Australia if I'm worried about them if they're big in my market. And so you have different. It's your company team and competitors competing with you. And every war game is kind of tailored to the individual. You could actually have two home teams. I could have United A and United B, and that way I get to test out more United Airlines company ideas in the war game. But the key thing is your competitors have to be there because when you launch some new service, a competitor can copy it. They can launch something that's better into it. They can attack you and say, hey, so and so is using this new airplane that's going to fall out of the sky. It's a bad plane. And, anything you want to do in the real world, you simulate in the war game. And again, the details of this are explained better in the videos, but
Yes.
you're basically putting in inputs, so United Airlines launches this new policy. Southwest could say our new policy is going to be something that's designed to make this new United policy look really, really bad. Or we're going to run an ad attacking this United policy. Anything that's feasible to do, you can do in a war game. But again, it's very, very competitive. Whereas when I normally do a strategic plan in a company, there's no one to criticize me. I don't get much challenge. Maybe the CEO will at the end say, I don't like the idea X and B, but this idea might be better for you. But you don't get much feedback and you don't get challenged in building it. And that's why most strategic plans are just, the past projected forward without really a lot of new. When you get into war games, almost everyone I've ever done, something wildly unexpected has come out of it as the best idea of the whole war game. And if you hadn't gone through this process, you never would have figured out this is the new service we need to launch. So we had no idea of before. And it kind of accidentally develops in the war games because our company launches it, someone else copies it, someone else reacts to it in a very competitive fashion. And you really get to stress test new ideas and develop a lot better ones. And you're doing this, spending a little bit of consultants' time and management time, but you're not actually launching a product. So it's cheap compared to launching, the McDouble sandwich from McDonald's and then finding out, the marketplace hates this thing, despite all our market research we did.
How do you simulate that type of thing in a war game? That's one of the questions I was curious about. So, for example, you say you launched a new McDouble for McDonald's, and there you're just in a simulation here, and there's someone judging, which is the market team, I guess,
Yeah, the
and
market team judges.
the market team is going to judge if the Mac Double was actually a good fit for any given public that they wanted to target. How do they judge that, and how do they come about saying that if this was a good idea or not in the middle of the simulation?
Sure. So the market team has both company personnel, but a lot of former company personnel. So, and again, you got to be careful because you're throwing out your ideas for your company, so you want to keep them confidential. So the consulting firm will have some reaction, but you can go out and hire experts. Some industry analysts, some people, some consumers, and bring them into the market team so you get that kind of reaction. But they're going to react to all kinds of ideas that get thrown out in this game. And then the CEO is also there. And the CEO is not normally not on the market team. I don't want to, again, the videos get into a little more details. He's on the control team, kind of
Yeah.
overseeing and running the war game, he or she. But the market team, you bring in professionals on that team that give you an ideas, and so that's kind of how it's done. But the other thing is, it's not just the market team evaluating. Competitor teams see your initiatives. So when you launch some new product, the market team may think, yeah, this isn't so hot. But if some other company thinks it's really hot and a good idea, they'll either copy it or do something a little bit better. And now the market team kind of sees, you know what, as I see these reactions to it, this probably is a good idea, especially the way that team B is doing it. And then they'll react that way. So that's how they get to make their judgment. So it is subjective. You're right about that. That's why I said it's not some electronic war game that, people are competing with numeric scores. It's all a very subjective process, but you get the right people on that market team, and you get really good reactions, we think, from our experience in seeing several war games.
That's very cool. Before we continue this podcast, let's run a quick ad on Hayek Global MBA. Let me give you a good news. During the past century, on average, import tariffs have fallen drastically all over the world, making it ever more globalized. Commerce has risen, walls have fallen, and nations have become more connected as people enjoy higher living standards. It also means there's a lot of opportunities for those who can connect businesses, people, and cultures from different countries. How do you prepare yourself for this new world? One easy answer is take some time off and go get an international MBA at an Ivy League university. But we know this is easier said than done, as you may have several constraints such as your family, a job, and it also costs a lot of money. What if you had an option of taking a part-time global MBA course officially accredited by the Ministry of Education in Brazil, which is 1. Truly international, with top-notch professors and students coming from all over the world. 2. Practical, with a curriculum focused on developing the skills and competencies that will most closely match what you will need in the job market. And 3. For a purpose, where you will discover how to create the most value and improve people's lives through the practice of business with transparency and integrity, while also maximizing your profits. Welcome to Hayek Global MBA, a 1-year online program designed to equip you with the tools to make a real difference in your company, lead world-class teams, and ultimately contribute to a freer, more prosperous, and peaceful world. Let's talk. Please visit hayekcollege.com/MBA. Dr. Drew, what are the applications that you see with this type of dynamic for education? Because gamification, for example, has been a very hot topic for education, where you would simulate, try to create fun ways for people to learn and do games inside of any given learning context. How do you think that this type of dynamic in business wargaming will be applicable to classes in a university, for example?
As I said earlier, I don't think it is taught anywhere in school. I mean, the big consulting firms developed this decades ago, and then I experienced it at ConAgra, and then I started doing it as my consulting firm. I don't think it's taught. I'm pretty 99% sure it's not taught in any business schools. So to do this, what I would do is, if I had, a kind of an advanced class, I wouldn't do this for an introduction to business course. But this could be kind of something like a final exercise. You've been through a marketing course, a strategy course, even an analysis operations research course, and yeah, that wouldn't fit as well. So more marketing and planning and management. So at the end of a course, you might run it so people can kind of apply some of the ideas they've used in the war game, especially if you covered a company or two during your class. Let's say you were studying, company X throughout the course. You could now do a war game where you have company X and their competitors in that. But you're going to certainly learn the importance of competition, marketing, and then what does it cost to develop launch a new product. I didn't get to the financials of it. They're covered some more in the video. But when you launch an initiative, you don't just say I'm launching this product. You say, you have to put in on the form, on your input form, this is how much it costs for me to develop it. This is going to be my marketing cost to put into it, my production cost and changes. Here's the price I'm selling it. Here's what I think. You put in financials for it. So there's financials in here too. So you could have a team, kind of an integrated course, a capstone course perhaps, where you do a war game at the end, where you got people as, I'm marketing major, I do the marketing part. I'm a management major, I do the management and the strategy. I'm the accounting guy, I take care of the financials for that. But you get to see everything in the war game.
Pretty cool. That would be a great capstone project. Mm-hmm. And well, you have your consultancy practice, and you also probably have a team of consultants that work with you. And what I'm curious to know is if I'm here a student preparing to be a management consultant like you, and I want to get into business wargaming, what are the characteristics that you look for at the people that you hire?
Well, we're not like the big firms. I mean, if you're a student, you're looking to go to, a McKinsey or a Booz Allen or one of the, accounting consulting firms. And I don't want to disparage them too much, but they that's not who we hire. We don't hire kids right out of college at our firm. So we hire and who we work with is we work with experienced business professionals. You've been a long time consultant and you got business experience. So the kids right out of college, they go to the big name firms, and the big name firms, someone like me who's got a lot of experience, I go to the client, I sell you on my services. Then once you sign the contract, it's the kids right out of college who do the work. not the experienced business
Yeah.
professionals. So we actually don't, well, I shouldn't say this. For the key roles in a war game, we use experienced people who've got decades of experience. If you're if you're right out of college and on our staff doing a war game, you're going to be doing frankly more grunt work, keeping track of the numbers, entering them in, running messages back and forth. We have electronic, but we also have paper backup. But in terms of like the experts on the marketing team, there's no young folks there unless we got on some young folks to judge a millennial product or service coming out. But again, it's very experienced people. So the people running a war game on the consultant side, and especially on the market team and the technology evaluation team, if it's a high tech industry or product or company, they're very experienced folks. They're not students out of college.
And you look for people that are experienced in multiple industries or in a certain industry? What is the criteria they look for?
It's both. We need generalists to run a war game, a lot of them, but if we're doing a food industry war game, we absolutely have to have a lot of food industry experts, especially on the market team.
Fantastic. We talked about multi-criteria decision analysis and how it's a very important topic that is not taught today in business schools. And would you like to give a little word on that?
Sure, it's a different topic than war games, but we were chatting earlier, and there's a lot of criticism of business schools that in general they don't teach what students need to learn as much as they teach what professors want to teach. And then they're very stovepiped. So the very most important tool I've ever used in business, and I've done a lot of operations research and analysis in business and also in military and government and other areas. But the most valuable tool I've ever used is called multi-criteria decision analysis. It's basically anytime you have a difficult decision to make, the reason it's difficult is you got a lot of alternatives and a lot of criteria. So alternative A may have the best profit for me, but it's got some really bad effects on our customer relations. It's government risky and it's bad for the environment. I've just named 4 criteria for you. Financial return, customer reaction to it, environmental impact, government, regulators. Or is this going to upset a government regulator? So you have all these conflicting criteria. So this one here is great for the public, but I don't make any money or I don't make much money on it. This one
Mhm.
here is a really risky that the government will shut down this new service. You have all these criteria. Well, how do you weigh them in your head? And the answer is you can't. You do a shitty job trying to do that. And that's what people do. They do a PowerPoint presentation. And this slide talks about, oh, this risk here, this alternative B is best. Now we go to all these things. And at the end of the briefing, you're supposed to say, after I've heard about, 5 alternatives and 6 or 7 criteria and all these impacts, now I'm supposed to make up in my mind which is best. You can't do it. So multi-criteria decision analysis is a tool where you rate all these alternatives by all these criteria, and they don't have to be just dollars and cents one. The public reaction, how do I rate that? Well, I don't rate it in terms of dollars. I invent a scale saying, it's public hates this. They're going to stop using our company. To the public loves this. They're going to buy more of our product. To in between, and I rate it on subjective scale. So I can consider any factor you want, and I can now numerically put it in this big spreadsheet. So at the end, I see that alternative C is the one that rates the highest, but it's based on the weights I give, the importance of the different criteria. So the nice thing is if I'm a team and we've come up and we say that, this is our ratings, this is our weights we recommend. We go to the CEO of the company and she looks at us and says, wait a minute, you're telling me that the public customer relations you only put a 5% weight on? Hey, that's way too low. So what do you want, ma'am? Well, I think it should be 25% of the decision. We type in 0.25, it recalculates, and it may be that alternative C is still the best, or it may be that now alternative D is the best. And then the other really big benefit of it, and this kind of does get back to wargaming, is as you're going through all these different alternatives, they're strictly this alternative or this one. What really happens in the best part of going through a decision analysis process with multi-criteria decision analysis is, let's say I've got these 4 alternatives. As I go through them, I figure out, you know what? This one has some big disadvantages, but if we change it, we can get rid of this disadvantages. Now we come up with alternative 5 that's basically this one, but I've changed it so now I don't have the disadvantages. I come up with better alternatives and better decisions. So it's just a very, very powerful tool, and it's just not taught in business schools. The reason why it's not taught, it's not a rational reason. It's not taught because multi-criteria decision analysis falls in the area of operations research. And most people in business classes, in business programs, they don't take operations research, or they take one course, so they miss it. And the second bad thing for multi-criteria decision analysis in typical education is it's a simple tool, powerful but simple. And if I'm an operations research teacher, I'm a math data nut. I love linear programming, multiple regression analysis, really complicated tools. So when I teach decision analysis, it's one lesson. I don't really like it. I skip over it. And now the next three lessons are on linear programming. And now there's five lessons on multiple regression analysis. And I've used those tools, but they're very, very difficult, not that good. And
You
they're
rarely,
worthless tools for most people because you're not going to have the data
yeah.
on all these criteria. So multi-criteria decision analysis is the best tool I've ever used or learned. Didn't learn it in college. I learned it on my own in the real world, but it should be taught. And unfortunately, if it is taught, it's just an operations research course. And if you surveyed, even business school graduates, I would bet 90% of them have never heard of it. And even of the 10% who heard of it, they had it in a lesson in operations research class, and they've already forgotten about it a year later.
Yes, and I have to admit to my listeners that I didn't hear about it until talking to you today.
Mhm.
So I believe it's quite unique, and we're gonna include some more information on the description here for whoever is more interested in the topic. And continuing here, Dr. Drew, we talked a lot about the things that you wish, for example, multi-criteria decision analysis. You wish people would have been taught in business schools, and I was curious about something that you learned the hard way throughout your career, that you wish you had been taught in a business school or by any given leader that you had in the past. Could you pinpoint any specific thing that you learned the hard way?
Um, well, again, I did operations research. I've done a lot of quantitative analysis, and unfortunately, most of the time, quantitative analysis isn't really all that effective. It's got problems, and multiple regression analysis, I mentioned that earlier. That's a tool that can get you to a lot of trouble. And the best explanation for it, it was provided by a guy named Nassim Taleb, and I'm
Hmm.
probably saying his name wrong, but he wrote a book, a very famous New York Times bestseller called The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. Don't think of that movie, The Black Swan. It's a book, The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. And he talks about how financial analysts, quantitative folks, operations researchers use what were taught in college, these techniques, but there's so many assumptions in there, and there's so many things that are just dead wrong in the way we're taught, that a lot of stuff we learn in college is not just wrong, it's dangerously bad. You
Hmm.
get set up to do bad things. For example, this is one of the biggest ones. We assume the normal distribution over and over again, the bell curve, and we tend to ignore the extremes, whereas in the real world, you know yeah, height and weight, that may follow basically a normal distribution, but most things in the real world don't. And also, the underlying data can change over time. There's a new technology, there's a shift in consumer attitudes and preferences. And so, this data you're using is kind of out of sync now with what's coming in the future, and you get into a lot of trouble. So, my best recommendation for folks, besides multi criteria decision analysis, is read The Black Swan, The Impact of the Highly Improbable. And, don't just read it. I thought the book was so much important. I made my own Cliff's notes for it. I
Hmm.
typed up the key points. I'd be glad to send it to you if you want to get it, because that book is so important. We learned some bad things, specifically in statistics and how we're taught to analyze in college. And in the real world, there's human tendencies that get you in trouble. You tend to always look at the past and project forward. Well, there's new technologies coming. things that haven't happened before. That's why he uses the term the black swan. People didn't think there were black swans in Europe. Turns out there really were. Just not you just had never seen them before. So when new technologies come along, they can dramatically change things. So people using this past data project the future get into massive trouble, and then they overestimate how well they can project because they're making bad assumptions, but you're taught to make those assumptions in college, and you end up doing it in the real world too. And you get into a lot of trouble. And Taleb talks about that in his book. It's by far the most valuable book I've ever read. Recommended highly. But I
Awesome.
didn't have it in college. I learned it again the hard way in experience.
You were talking, and I also thought about another author called Friedrich Hayek, which
Hmm.
is the also the inspiration for our name. And he talks about how the social sciences are very different from the hard sciences, in that the variables that you are accounting for in your assumptions in your models are not always all the variables that you should account for, and it's impossible to know all the variables that are going to be there. So
Right.
uh, and then there's this great essay that summarizes pretty well his thought is in the use of knowledge in society.
Hmm.
And he goes through how preferences change, and how you can never predict, what's going to happen exactly the way that you said. And I guess the key is social sciences are very hard to predict, but at the same time it's good to use quantitative tools
Hmm.
to do science, use the scientific method as a method of decision making within the company, right? You wouldn't want to uh, completely take off the scientific method from the decision making in the company.
No, and then back to multi-criteria decision analysis. That is analysis. I mean,
Hmm.
it's discovering the problem, framing it correctly, looking at alternatives, and then analyzing the alternatives and the weights you want to put into it, and looking at uncertainty. You can have a range of answers on stuff. So this is a great tool to get around some of the problems you have with quantitative analysis. If you make too many assumptions and simplify, this lets you do sensitivity analysis where you vary the assumptions. If this situation holds, it's like this, but I can do in the decision analysis, I can do, well, what if this happens? I can look at different scenarios and now see all these alternatives compare. So what if there's another pandemic? What if it's avian flu, not COVID-19, 60% lethal, that strikes in another year? Well, this alternative is, these four alternatives don't work in a bad pandemic. This new product or service, we actually could continue to operate this during a pandemic, and it turns out it's a service that's valuable during a pandemic. So during the good years, these three may perform better financially, but this fourth alternative that doesn't make as much money in good times is our breadwinner for us in a pandemic situation. So you can do sensitivity analysis, scenario analysis using multi-criteria decision analysis tools.
Fantastic. And at this point in your career, Dr. Drumiller, being a very successful consultant, what are you curious about right now?
Well, I think we're entering kind of a new era. I mean, I mentioned this avian flu. It wasn't accidental. I mean, avian flu, if you listen to the experts, they tell you it's inevitable. We're going to have it in a human transmissible form. I mentioned Nassim Taleb and the black swan, the impact of the highly improbable. What he said to do is, you don't want to ignore rare events. That's what banks and most businesses do. Well, if there's a dock workers strike, we're screwed. So they don't think about that. But no, that's not what you need to do at all. You need to say, what's our contingency plan if there's a dock workers strike? And if you don't have a good contingency plan, pardon me, you know, how can we get away from this import dependence we've got? Can we develop an alternative domestic source of supply so our supply chain's not as vulnerable? Businesses need to be doing more worst case planning, sensitivity analysis, worrying about black swan threats, and pandemics are going to be out there big time because it's not just the natural ones, it's bioengineering. Biotechnology is going to be the tool that and some people think it's going to end up wiping out our species. I hope it doesn't do that. But our future is one of pandemics, lots of them. and not just natural causes. I think COVID-19 was a natural mutation that developed, but it's going to be engineered by either nutty people, by biologists who think, hey, there's too many people, we got to stop global warming by stopping the human population, or worse, by Iran or North Korea. The technology is out there. You can't put it back in a bottle. And it's easy, relatively easy, for you to manipulate a virus like avian flu and make it more lethal or make it human to human contagious. It's already very lethal, and that's what's going to happen. And I hope that COVID-19 would kind of be a wake-up call for businesses, and I don't think it has been. They're all talking about, getting back to normal, pandemic's gone, and we're operating again. Now, that's not the right mindset. Your mindset needs to be, there's avian flu, there's bio attacks. Our future is operating in a world where pandemics are a regular occurrence, and one's far worse than COVID-19. But you don't hear that much out there in the news or in the business community. Hate to be gloomy at the close here, but
Yeah, it's a way to think about it. We should be prepared for the worst. Um, and the way I see things is also COVID-19 made us be much more prepared for at least health-related issues that we were used to be before. I mean, vaccines came a lot faster than they used to come before. I hope now that people went through this, that if we were to come through another pandemic, things are going to come even faster, right? Because we're more prepared. I hope it comes down that way. It's just a matter we have to wait and see.
yeah, in terms of vaccines, I mean, unless they change the testing process, I mean, you really can't make it any faster than it was. You got to administer it, wait for people to have their reactions. That takes time. So
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to beat the vaccine time we had on COVID-19. I think that's the best you're going to be able to do. And in this case, it's also a virus where it was possible to develop vaccines. Think about AIDS. That took decades of research. A lot of effort went into that, but just the nature of that disease, it just wasn't able to come up with a vaccine or an easy cure. So I'm not as optimistic as you are about that. I think our vaccine speed is not going to get faster than it was here. And when you're dealing with a virus that's not less than 1% lethal, like COVID-19, the
Mm-hmm.
Spanish, the 1918 flu, that was like 1.5, 2% lethal, quite a bit more. But again, there's Ebola and avian flu, things that have high double digit lethalities, and that's completely different kind of situation to deal with. And businesses need to be worried about things like that and planning for those kinds of disruptions, those kind of, I wouldn't call it a black swan event because that's not unpredictable. It's going to happen. If you talk to biologists, words they use are inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
This is going to happen, but businesses aren't prepared for it. And if you read the Black Swan, Taleb explains why. It's human nature not to think about that. Who does want to think about those things? People don't, so they don't.
Exactly. Cool. Dr. Drew Miller, it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Except for the end.
Well, let's close it up until it gets even gloomier, right? No, I'm just joking. But would you have any closing remarks for us today?
Again, MultiCriteria decision analysis, folks need to look into that. Again, it's not taught in most schools. Business wargaming is probably the best way to develop a strategic plan. And then I really recommend The Black Swan by Nassim Taleb.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure having you today.
Thank you.
During 2 to 3 days of wargame play, which is several rounds of play, company teams develop strategies and strategic initiatives, competitors and suppliers respond, and the market reacts.
I'm Dr. Drew Miller, the Director of Advanced Analysis Applications. We design and run business strategy wargames to help you stress test your business development plans and help you develop more realistic and robust plans that will really consider market and competitor reactions. Fortune 100 companies have been using business strategy war games for decades, paying big-name consulting firms millions of dollars to run them. We can operate war games at much lower costs, including group war games that allow a company to participate for just a few $1,000s.
Several weeks prior to the strategy war game, A3 personnel interview clients' leadership to define objectives, set up scenarios such as a new product launch or an acquisition, and select major industry developments that will be simulated in the war game. We then define operating parameters of the game, such as the time horizon and length of each round of play, and how long the war game will last, a day or up to 3 days, with many rounds of play. Company teams are selected and participants study competitors and consider strategic initiatives they may employ. During the war game, competing teams develop and then submit initiatives, such as launching new products, changing policies to deal with regulatory changes and industry developments. The market and environment team reviews these strategic initiatives and gives market reaction to them. Competitor teams also react to other teams' initiatives, often launching a countermeasure initiative to subvert your strategic initiative. The control team is monitoring all these actions, sometimes intervening to change the course of wargame play, and they inject new industry changes that have been pre-planned or some that come up during the wargame as a likely key event. Companies often alter and change their initiatives, sometimes relaunching a new product or re-attempting an acquisition that failed in an earlier round of the war game, with more market feedback and competitor reactions. The control team evaluates how well each team did at the end of each round of play, and at the conclusion of the war game, there's a group debrief and wrap-up from client sponsors.
Big companies have long used war games to test product ideas and develop better strategies. But now any size company can afford to participate and reap the advantages of these future marketplace competitive exercises. This wargame was tailored to address international trade disruptions for manufacturers. We can design a wargame that fits your needs and will realistically stress test your business plans. A3 personnel interview company leadership and work with clients to define objectives, set up scenarios such as new product launches or an international trade war or a big regulatory change, and then we help you define operating parameters of the game, such as the time horizons. During 2 to 3 days of wargame play, which covers several rounds, company teams will develop strategies and strategic initiatives, competitors and suppliers will respond, and the market team will react. At the conclusion, there is a group debrief and a wrap-up, and then A3 prepares a report on key findings. The heart of the wargame is competing teams thinking up and launching major initiatives, such as new products and services, policy changes, and acquisitions to grow their business. The initiatives form shown here, which varies by wargame, is filled out and submitted to the market and control teams, and competitors are then given a realistic overview of what their rival is up to in the game. The market team reacts to company team initiatives, judges market reaction, and evaluates how the market, consumers, and other firms in the industry that are not played in the war game would react to these strategic initiatives. Competing teams also react to these initiatives and often copy them or work to subvert them.
The competing company teams submit initiatives such as changes in products or services, or sourcing or new business development efforts. The marketing team is staffed with industry experts who evaluate the initiatives and look for weaknesses. At the same time, competitor teams submit responses to other teams' initiatives where they may take actions to copy or defeat a competing company's actions.
Each round of play starts with a newscast that brings players up to date on major events in the future scenario. Subject matter experts may present on some of the major issues and trends. Key developments relevant to the scenario are briefly addressed, and then the participants break up into their team rooms. The most cited advantage of wargames is uncovering strategic insights and new ideas for opportunities to pursue and mistakes to avoid that participants had no idea of prior to the wargame. You develop better skills at anticipating customer responses and a new mindset of always thinking strategically, weighing the likely competitive and market responses more realistically. Everyone reports unexpected results from wargames. A problem or opportunity that they had never considered or dismissed in the past is now seen as critical. You gain far more intense, innovative, and realistic insights than a typical strategic plan brainstorming session. You get much better understanding of competitors, industry trends, and how to deal with them. Many stress that there are both immediate and future benefits. A few immediate must-do-now strategic ideas result, but also some future experience that you can utilize later, such as much more quickly recognizing a threat and opportunity
that they first experienced in a wargame. Participants consistently note that their view of the world has changed. They are aware of some unrealistic assumptions they had previously, more attuned to pending changes, and think more strategically now, meaning an idea is evaluated not just based on its immediate advantages to the firm, but how competitors will react.
A key advantage of business wargaming is that it can be scoped as broadly or as narrowly as you wish. You can test a change in your product lineup, your business strategy in a particular market, or a series of strategic moves and counter moves over a decade. You just won't get the intensity and quality of likely competitor reactions from brainstorming in a strategic planning session. You need to stress test your plans in a competitive wargame where competitor teams are focused on shooting holes in your plans and developing their own better plans to succeed. It's surprisingly easy to model those competitor teams because your own people often know what moves they most fear competitors will make. A business strategy wargame enables you to test your responses to those moves and formulate better strategies.
Wargames are extremely valuable to help educate and integrate staff. They're a highly effective method to think strategically and consider competitor reactions. Wargames are used after mergers, acquisitions, and reorganizations to develop new strategies, new thinking, and help people get to know each other. It's highly effective.
Wargames are also used for leadership development. Those involved in the exercise operate under real-world conditions, and executives can observe how they handle the various scenarios and situations that arise. Many report the wargame was better than their MBA program in developing practical, usable analytic skills. I ran a wargame for a group of grain companies that had recently merged to develop both a better strategic plan and to help personnel from the now combined firms get to know each other's thinking and integrate better. Both objectives were achieved. Planning meetings cannot provide the competitive dynamics, intensity, depth of thought and analysis, and even brutal feedback that wargames provide. Fortune 100 companies have used wargames to test new product development ideas, acquisitions, and design best courses of actions to deal with pending issues. Scenarios, intensive competitive play, and experts on the market team reacting to your proposals that your company team launches in the game, all this serves to red team stress your ideas. Wargaming is the ideal way to anticipate how competitors in the market will react to contemplated initiatives, discovering vulnerabilities you can fix before you launch. Wargaming also permits your personnel to try anything they could in real life over years of future market and competitive conditions and experience and react to possible results. Strategic wargaming provides future experience to help guide current decisions and improve both your strategic plans and your management skills.
Thanks for listening to Profit Talks. Now, do you have any comments or other business-related question? If so, please send us, and we'll be glad to explore it in future episodes. Also, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. We are on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and many others.